All around us in this room right now are hundreds of devices, spatial devices, that know where they are and they know where you are. Your watch that told you the path you went on a walk this morning, how fast you walked and what your heart rate was. Your phone that maybe gave you directions here, or that told you where the closest coffee shop was on your drive in. These hundreds of devices, known and unknown to us, and the thousands and 10,000s and countless thousands more in this town, in this state, are part of the geospatial technology network that make the 21st century function. Think about it. You can go to the grocery store and your refrigerator can send you a text saying, "We're out of milk. Can you buy some?" All because of this interconnected network of spatial technologies. And they go even bigger than that. You can go online and look at satellite imagery of your town, your house, where you grew up, and have those images, have those memories going back 20, 40, even more years than that. So from satellites to spatial thinking from GPS to geo-privacy, we have all of these different embedded ideas, all these different embedded capabilities in our day-to-day. How does that make you feel, knowing that you've got a record of your spatial activities over the past week or month or year? Different platforms, different organizations, different companies have that data and use it in different ways. Maybe you use it. Pretty easy to make a fun map of what you did on summer vacation when conveniently your phone has stored all of the locations that you took all of those photos in the entire time when you were traveling. What I do is teach courses in geographic information science, GIS. And I ask my students, I ask the people I work with all the time to think about how can we address these questions? How can we figure out the best practices? How do we use the technologies, but what do we make of it? What do we use that knowledge for? How do we put all of that information together? So I'm going to invite you into my classrooms. Think about all these different topics and how we put this together. And when we're in my Introduction to GIS class, the class that gets a lot of people started on their geospatial technology journeys, I say this: it starts with geography. It's in the name, right? Geography, geospatial. Geographic information science, the suite of tools and technologies and approaches and analytics that allow you to have that nice web map that gets you from point A to point B. A lot better than printing it off or trying to figure out how to fold the map back together and then you shove it in the glove box and you buy a new one at the next rest stop if you find that, right? All of these different things are related to geography. So in my classroom, we start with the map. It's from the Library of Congress. You can get a lot of awesome historical and current maps there. If you squint really closely, you might be able to see where we are at. You might trace the lines, a railroad and township map of Massachusetts. And you might see those connections of, well, some of those look like the highways now. I might have ridden on one of those rail lines going in and out of Boston or Providence or wherever and however you've come and gone. So the maps, in their many forms, in the many ways that we represent spatial information, whether on simple maps of where things are like that, or in our more complex ideas of GIS data and layers and analytics, someone made a decision to put that data on there. Someone said, we're going to show this road, we're going to show that rest stop, we're going to show you an ad for that coffee shop in your map app, and not that other one. All of this data, all this information has been chosen, has been selected. We like to think of maps as arbiters of truth. It's on the map, it must be there. But maps are productions of people. And maps in their many forms, maps in the many different ways that they function, are abstractions. The same goes for GIS, and that's something the students get tired of it because this slide shows up like every week, so easy pick to speak to here. They're all abstractions of reality. We cut reality into different layers, into different pieces. I'm going to add the streets. I'm going to add the land use. But I'm also going to define the land use in a certain way. As we address and interact with these, we start to learn that spatial thinking is a pathway to critical thinking. What's on the map? Why did the map maker put it there? How are you learning about this place with these pieces of data versus other pieces of data? What would you like to know? What do you wish you would know? We can use spatial thinking and think about where we are, the devices we're using, the data that's being gathered all around us all the time as a way to understand our world. As a way to understand our community. As a way to understand that everything is related to everything else. But near things are more related than distant things. The geographer Waldo Tobler wrote this, and it's often called the first law of geography. Unlike the laws of thermodynamics, this one you can break. This one you can squeeze and stretch. If something is close to me temporally, that's different than if it's close to me physically. If something is close to me culturally, different than it's distant from me culturally. And so we start to see geography as a lens into our relationships, into our networks, into our communities, and how we can work together and think about how all of those interact and interrelate. Throughout my career and throughout the ways I've interacted with geography and GIS, I found that geospatial technologies enable this type of discovery. It is easier now than ever to pull up a map, to pull up historical imagery, to pull up data. We could right now download the entire 2010 census. Probably do it in 10 minutes, right? So everyone pull out your laptops, and that's what, now, different workshop, I think. That data is accessible to us. Anybody can get it. You just need an internet connection and a computer that can take you there. This is especially true of imagery. And imagery is something that is so powerful and so amazing. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So what's 40 years of pictures every 2 weeks across the entire planet worth? This is an analysis from Peru in the upper Amazon. The colors you're seeing there are the years that the forests were lost. Deforestation in the Amazon is a huge and major concern, not just for the indigenous people that live there, not just for the industries that are developing the region, but for the whole planet. In this case, a researcher analyzed a few years of data, all of those images from a satellite called Landsat. These Landsat satellites have been orbiting the Earth for 40 years plus, taking images. Imagine if you had that in your photo album. Every 2 weeks or so, a picture of your house, of your family growing up. How many photo albums would that fill? How many bookshelves would you need for those images? We've got that for the whole planet. I show these off in my classes and I say, what do you see? What do you notice? What are we looking at? In this case, we're looking at lakes in Australia. The lakes are disappearing. What does that mean for drought? What does that mean for climate change? What does that mean for cultures? So we have these huge data sets. We have these huge amounts of data and these processing and these algorithms and these servers, and how does it work? How do you put all of that together? Well, it's not magic. None of this technology is magic. It feels like it sometimes. We want to believe that it is. But especially in geospatial technologies, when I have students come to me and say, oh, I need to understand the historic forest cover in New Hampshire. How do I do that? And I say, welcome to my GIS programming course, where we learn the fundamentals of computer science, of programming, of scripting, of learning things like Python and R of learning what a server is, learning what all the pieces are that go together and make these things work. Because it's one thing to be able to access. It's one thing to be able to log into a platform and very easily use what has been provided to you. Use what someone else has said, oh yeah, you should look at this stuff. It's another thing to make it. It's another thing to put it together. And as spatial thinkers, as geographers, as people who are interested in the world of GIS, it's really important to think about the infrastructure. Now, we're used to infrastructure, the railroads, the roads, the power lines. But what about the cyber infrastructure? What about the foundational technologies, the pieces that allow us to build up these data sets, that allow us to analyze and process the imagery, that allow us to say, I know what a forest looks like, and I know what not a forest looks like. I'm going to analyze and figure out all of those changes. Not just for one image, not just for one state, not just for one region, but for the entire globe. So now we're stepping into one of my classes on readings in GIS. Let's think about what GIS means. Let's think about what the futures of GIS might be. And if we're integrating these different fields, geography is naturally multidisciplinary after all. How do we bring in this idea of big data? Probably heard big data. What about supercomputers? Heard of a supercomputer. What about all these things that enable visualization, that enable us to make maps, to find out relationships, to understand nearness in a different way that we couldn't do without someone's big old supercomputer someplace else in the world? We might say comparatively to 30 years ago that the device in all of our pockets would be a supercomputer to them. I like to think about the first GIS, which was developed in Canada. And there's a wonderful video, and the developer of this GIS, named Roger Tomlinson, is talking about the affordances of the computer. And he looks over his shoulder, and behind him are, as tall as he is, racks and racks and racks of machines, going back a whole room, going back a whole network, a whole building. The supercomputer then was so different than the supercomputer now. But they both allow us to put together spatial information and to put together these different ideas and capabilities and capacities. But there's a divide. We used to talk about the digital divide as people who could use computers and people who didn't. But that's almost an obsolete definition. Now it's a divide between people who can use computers and people know how to make the computers work, who can code, who can script, who can tinker around and write an algorithm, write a loop. Where back into my GIS programming class, they write a for loop at the beginning of every class. If you don't know what a for loop is, come in sometimes. They don't know what it is at the beginning of the class either. But by the end of the semester, they've written enough of them that they can do them in their sleep. Spatial thinking needs computational thinking too. These combinations and piecing together of different ways of thinking and different modes of thinking are really important. And when you put the definitions side by side, it's actually quite revealing. Thinking like a computer scientist means more than being able to program a computer. It requires thinking at multiple levels of abstraction. I hear multiple levels and my geography brain goes scale. We know scale. Multi-scalar relationships. The different ways that things relate. How your neighborhood operates differently than your town, than your county, than your state. But spatial thinking is a constructive amalgam of three mutually reinforcing components: the concept of space, tools of representation, and processes of reasoning. Well, that gets me to thinking in computational thinking how you break a problem down into different parts. When we're analyzing 40 years worth of Landsat data, we start with a piece of that, right? How are we going to download the data? There's a piece. How are we going to display it? There's a piece. And we break it up so that it's accomplishable, so that we can do it. Now you're coming into my research side. A current project I'm working on is thinking about what this cyber literacy means. That literacy word again. We can think about the necessity and the vitality of spatial thinking of geography. We also have to think about the necessity and the vitality of understanding modern technology, how it works, how it functions, who's going to develop the next big thing. And when you place those items side by side, when you put those topics together, you get this interesting and wonderful and colorful world of ideas and topics and concepts that can guide us into that geospatial frontier. Well, geographic information science, sure, there are technologies that allow us to do modeling and analytics, but we have to think about those problems too. And in computational science, we have different types of computing, like parallel computing. What's that? What does that enable? Where these start to overlap, we think about, well, how do we communicate together? How can I go to a computer scientist? I'm not a computer scientist. But how can I go and say, I've got images of the whole planet for 40 years. Help. Oh, and the computer science can go to me and can come back and they need to be able to talk to me and say, tell me more about a map. And then we communicate. In all of these combinations, in all of these ways of putting our fields, our domains, our ways of thinking together, we can think forward into this frontier of education and think about the value from our domains, the value from geography, the value from computer science, but really think about these interrelationships. Because what we can do, what is possible, is incredible with the geospatial data that we have. We want to have an impact, we want to make a difference. Well, what's more a difference than being able to make something that anybody can access? As we think about all of those things together, we think about the future and the frontiers of geography. Thank you.